Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have me Faraz Mirzaei, who is currently a staff software engineer at Google. Now, Faraz started off his career as an intern scientist. Subsequently, he had actually joined as a engineer at Qualcomm, in which he actually was co-inventor of 22 patents, working very closely with certain products, particularly on indoor localization, context analysis of smartphones, and other related aspects of those topics. And of course, he joined Google, as I just said, as a staff software engineer. Now, for us, can we get started with your background and from your perspective as to why you first became technical and what led you to Google, essentially?
Hi. Yes, thanks, Ariane. Thank you for having me over here. I received my PhD in computer science back in 2012, and from the get-go, I was interested in consumer products and making something that can be used, can be valued by consumers. And the reason that I initially joined Google was a little bit of my background from graduate school, which was about computer vision. So the first team that I joined at Google, it was about augmented reality and virtual reality. It was really about understanding of the world from the perspective of like a camera on your phone or on your headset. But very quickly, after probably a couple of years, or maybe even less than 2 years at Google, I got to this point where like I was generating, quite a bit of code. Like I was basically writing software, and I knew that for every hundreds of line of codes that I write, I probably introducing a couple of bugs. And the question was that, what's the upside? Like, what am I adding? What is the value I'm adding for all of these bugs that I'm for sure adding? And that was the start of my journey into essentially measuring success for software. Like, how do you define what success is from the get-go? And interestingly, this got me back into the work that I learned, the skills that I learned at grad school about statistics, because really measuring success, it's not a deterministic problem. When you're talking about the software that is being used by different users, they have different ways of using the software. And then especially when you're working with software such as, let's say Google Map, I'm working on these days, different part of the world, they have different data sets that back the, back up the visualization that you see. And all of these data sets are noisy, and their results are not necessarily deterministic. So it's not like that you can say that if this happens for sure there's success. So really I went very deep into this idea of, in the presence of noise, in the presence of imperfect measurements and imperfect algorithms, how do we understand success? How do we quantify success? How do we measure headroom against that success or regressions when we have success established and we are just moving forward with adding features? So that was really the start of my journey.
Well, that's very excellent. And I want to touch on, before we get to the actual work you're doing right now with Google, which you just mentioned, I'd like to understand a little bit more of the background itself. With a lot of engineers I've spoken to, specifically at the principal level, a lot of them have had a point in their career where being technical is excellent, and having a pure technical skill is very good. Now, understanding the end user and the business solution is also a very good aspect of becoming an engineer. For you, did you always know that the end product should be in mind? Or is it when you joined Qualcomm? Because I've seen in your career that's where you've done a lot of the work with the product side of things.
I think still at Qualcomm and even at Google, I was more hands-on, like a feature engineer. Yes, I had a lot of patents. That was basically the environment that Qualcomm would incentivize, especially for people with PhDs, that we had to really come up with inventions that could be later used as patents and so on. But the reality of it was that for the first few years of my career, I was really just trying to get my hands dirty with like day-to-day work of software engineering. The part where the question that you're asking about, like what is the actual problem that we are solving, that was later on, maybe a couple of years after I started, at Google. And it is important to make the distinction, because if if I was not like a good software engineer who was able to submit code and write new
Mhm.
features and ship, new features and so on, I wouldn't have been able to really come up with a product roadmap that was
Mhm.
grounded in reality. So
Right.
that backbone, uh, backbone of like having done pure software engineering, written code, C++ codes, thousands of lines of codes, and
Right.
testing it, failing and testing it again, and eventually getting it to be shipped. That was more like a tool that would
Mhm.
allow me to understand what it takes to actually ship a feature. That later on, when I became like leader of a team, I was able to have an idea, to develop an idea about like, okay, this is takes that much amount of effort, or what are the best practices, what are the best principles
Mhm.
when you get to implementing them. Now still, I essentially up leveled a little bit myself in my career to understand, okay, now I know how to solve, but what is the problem, like what
Mhm.
is the actual problem that needs to be solved. And this is a part that it gets to the business and to the impact. It's sometimes in business schools they talk about what and why,
Mhm.
and the solution is really the how part. I prefer to call them problem space and solution space. Like even in my
Mhm.
team, when I work with folks in my team, I keep telling them that the first part of getting into a new project, a new software, a new feature, is to understand the problem space.
Mhm.
Forget all of the things that you know. No, like forget that you have a screwdriver or a hammer. If you stick to that hammer, you're gonna see everything like a nail. Like forget all of that. Just put yourself in the perspective of the users of
Mhm.
whatever product you're working on, and see what are the problems that they want to solve, not
Mhm.
what are the problems that you like to solve. Because in that case, you're going to spend a couple of months and come back and say that, oh, nobody actually needs this because this is some peculiar thing that I came up with.
Excellent. Now, a really important question I have for you is about identifying the correct problem to solve. Now, you did say that you want to understand the problem space. Now, a lot of the things I've noticed is in my conversations is that identifying the correct problem to solve is the hardest part of the problem. The technical solution, because you have a lot of experience, which is of course an integral part, would be the easier solution or easier part of the process. So, how do you identify what the right problem solve is?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, and it's a skill set that needs to be learned in practice. So
Mhm.
it's less of like prescription of like do it this way or that way. I would say that it starts with, first of all, being humble. Like when you
Mhm.
start working in a new domain, in new software, new, just be okay with not knowing it. Like
Mhm.
have confidence in your ability to learn. And I'm quoting Adam Grant here from his book Hidden Potential, where he says that have confidence that in your ability to learn,
Yeah.
but be humble that you don't know it yet. And when you
Mhm.
don't know it, what do? You become a user. Like
Mhm.
first you go and interview actual users, actual people whose problem you want to solve, and then you yourself try to solve the same problem. Like
Mhm.
see the world from their perspective. And this is the word that I want to I mentioned. It's like empathy. I know that some people in business circles are saying that empathy is bad or whatever. They have no idea what they're talking about. Maybe they don't know
Mhm.
what empathy means, but really empathy is like this is a user is dealing with this problem, and
Mhm.
this is how the work needs to become more efficient or streamlined.
Mhm.
What are the problems that this user is facing? And
Right.
that needs humbleness, that needs starting from scratch, that means being on the ground. And um, and another aspect of identifying the right problems is that, and this is something that I learned when I was at Chrome web browser. One of the great directors that we had there, Jason Kersey,
Mhm.
was always intent on what we would call brutal prioritization. And the way that he would define it is that come to me with your strategic plans, identifying three problems or
Mhm.
problem spaces that you want to solve, but you only have resources to solve just one of them. So for every one problem you solve, show me two real problems that
Mhm.
you would love to solve, but you cannot solve it, and now you've done the prioritization. And I wouldn't just
Interesting.
get some like I don't know, placeholders or boilerplates and so on, like real, actual problems, real interviews, real sitting down and trying to do a user journey of, okay, I want to ship this product. How do I measure success on it? X, Y, Z. Actual interviews, actual transcripts, and actual problem spaces. And then also connecting, and this gets to the space of, prioritization. Now you have like 3 problems that you identified. You know that you're not going to be able to solve all of them.
Sure.
One is the one that you want to solve. How do you find that one? It gets impact. It doesn't get to what you like to solve. It gets, if you like to solve what you want to solve, you probably better be an artist as opposed to an engineer.
Right.
But if you really want to solve a problem that people have, you're going to see what is the return on investment. Okay, this is a complex problem, and this is an area where you also need to know about t-shirt sizing a little bit. But yeah, so multiple problems and priority.
Very good, very good. And you said something very important that I think maybe people won't actually focus on as important, about the fact that you have to be humble. Because if you come in with the intention or the perspective that you know everything, you will miss opportunities of knowledge that you would otherwise not get. So I can very much appreciate that perspective. And I think it can be perceived as not as important, but if you come in with the perspective that I actually need to understand this user and understand their perspectives, I don't know everything. And that's going to give you the ability to recognize certain opportunities you didn't recognize before. And so I can definitely appreciate that. Now, something else that was very important that you were talking about was what you're doing now with Google Maps is measuring what is considered successful, right? What is the successful outcome? That does require you to identify what are the important metrics that you identify that are considered indicators of success. So how do you identify those metrics when you're trying to measure what's considered successful?
Yeah, so we are at a part of Google Maps where we essentially receive a lot of like imagery data. We do photogrammetry, and then from there on, AI comes into place, extracts like information about like businesses, roads, the opening hours of businesses and things like that, like where's the right turn, left turn, and so on and so forth. So now, as a unit of Google, where we receive this data, our clients are essentially downstream AI teams that ingest this data and produce their results. So what is my success? I look at it I want my clients to be successful. So my downstream clients, I want them to be successful. Okay, let me go and see how they measure success. Yes. And do they measure success? Actually, in a lot of cases, you see that, they're more in that earlier stages of their product, crawling and then walking and then running and flying. They're still at the crawl stage. So that they're not ready yet to measure like quality of their output. They're really trying to see if they have a product market fit. Who are the people? Who are the ones who are at the walking stage of their product? And what are the tools they have? What are the ways they have to measure their success? And now that I know what success means to them, how can I come up with an infrastructure or a set of like processes to measure the impact of my product on their success? And this is the force multiplier part of it, that you identify essentially one thing that you do by improving your product by 30%, 20%, it gets multiplied, and the output of your clients they get improved by even 60%, 70%. So being able to see that you have a rate of return, it's not marginal. It doesn't diminish as it gets to the client. It actually gets expanded and magnified. That's another aspect of prioritization. Another thing is that I want to mention there is that especially at big companies like Google, working with literally global scale data that comes from the entire Earth, all this imagery that comes, and having run, like Google has been running Google Map for many years. There's a lot of infrastructure that go into really producing what you see on consumer Google Map. A lot of it is really chaotic. A lot of it is like really people have done their best to make sure that users get the end product at a scale, at a global scale. But sometimes people run away from the challenge of this chaos, that, there's this problem that is, oh, it's so complicated. This data goes from A to B, C, D, and they interact with each other. Let me go somewhere else where I'm more comfortable. That's an area where I say that actually go for where you feel uncomfortable. That's where there is a challenge. That's where opportunities are. If you feel comfortable, you're not growing. If low-hanging fruits have already been picked. So that's another area that even in the metrics story, in the success story, I want to try and see what are the challenging spaces. And I get
excellent. So you're identifying what moves the needle for the end product or the end user essentially, and you understand what is infrastructure I can set up that would actually impact that process and moves the needle for that, which is very interesting. Now, something else I wanted to talk about was that prioritization component. I had a conversation with the principal software engineer from Google a couple of days ago, and one of the things he mentioned is that when you focus on business outcomes and the end user, you also understand what trade-offs to make better when you're creating the solution itself. And I think it might tie in what you're talking about, if I'm interpreting properly, with prioritization. So how does understanding the end product and the outcome you're trying to create help you make better trade-offs as an engineer?
So if I understood it correctly, when you go to your clients and you do the interviews and you actually sit down and try to do what the clients are doing today, and that's very important, be your own user, and it's very common at Google. We do all this fish fooding and, dog fooding. We try our own products as much as we can before we ship it out. And that means that be your, user of your own infrastructure as well. You get to basically see what are the bottlenecks they have. Identifying the long poles matter. Identifying things that are really hot spots, those matter. There's a lot of nice to haves. But that's where we have this concept of minimum viable product, MVP, and minimum lovable product, which both of them are important. But both of them are also speaking to not necessarily having a perfect product, but instead meeting the functional requirements, that's the MVP, and then meeting the non-functional requirements, that's gonna be the MLP, minimum lovable product. And if we are at a point where we are going and addressing all of the nice to haves, I go back to the director that I had at Chrome, that maybe we're not looking at a big enough of scope. Maybe we are not looking at enough of a problem space, and we are hanging on to this marginal return of, okay, it's nice to have this, added additional feature and so on. So 80% of the features done, this product is done, move on to other things. Not because there's no more opportunity on this first product, but because there are more problems to be solved.
Right. That are bigger and have a bigger impact, essentially. So I can appreciate that. Now, I know we have a limited amount of time today, but you and I could easily have a conversation for 3 hours and it would go that way. But I would ask just two remaining pieces of discussion on your work. And the first question I actually have for you on those concluding questions is about your approach to leadership. I know that you, as staff engineer, you've had the opportunity to lead other teams, but there was definitely a point where you went from being purely technical to now leading teams. How was that transition for you?
The transition was very fulfilling. I think it's one of the best part of my life, actually coming to work and working with a super, super strong, very smart, very dedicated, motivated group of people. And then trying them in their journey to become the best version of themselves, seeing them as individual human beings with their own ambitions, with their own characteristics and idiosyncrasies, like every one of us. And then once in a while, you give them a hint here, you give them a tool over there, some experience that you share, some book that you introduce to them, and you see that they pick it up and they run, and you see them running, you see them growing, and that becomes probably, for my life, at work, that's one of the biggest motivating factors for me, to see people working with me. They're growing, they're becoming better engineers, better product managers. And a core component of that is connecting to them at a human level, having good rapport with them, and caring about them, caring about their life, and not trying to replicate them the way I am. When you delegate something, they're gonna do it their way. Give them space. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail, and actually there's nothing like failure. They learn from it. As long as at Google we have this process we call post-mortem. Even if something fails, we introspective. We write a retrospective, we understand what failed, and we address as much as we can, we address part of it. So it's a learning process. So yeah, I guess that's
I love that. And I love that you pointed in the right direction rather than trying to micromanage. I think that's actually one of the things that is really great leadership is being able to have allow people to do it in their own ways, but not micromanaging them. I think that's one of the one of the things that leaders do well is pointing them in the right direction and having them go focus on the end result that actually moves the needle, but doing it in their own way, which is very interesting. Now, a concluding question for you is about AI, and I'm sure you've been acquainted with how AI is changing engineering and how it's changing it on a month-to-month basis, right? Of course. So, how do you think AI is going to be changing your work and in terms of engineering from your perspective in the next couple of years?
Yes, it's amazing how much it has already changed. I think
Yes.
we are going to move more towards a world, at least this is how it is today. I don't know a year from now, but today we are moving more towards an environment where we don't really write code that much. Most of the engineers, they use prompts, but what they provide, essentially, these are RAG pipelines, retrieval augmented generation, where we provide like a design document. We provide a software architecture document. We use AI as well to generate, these documents. But once you have the software architecture, you get, AI to design the API, and then you go and get another AI from different context. You don't need to reuse the same context to design the API, and then you use yet another AI to go and
Specialized AI or
implement
agents.
engines that don't share context. It's very
Right.
important not to share context between them. So a second AI goes and implements all of the tests. And this is a part that gets interesting because you have, from a functional and non-functional requirements, you have unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and then you can also get to metrics and quality and success. You implement the infrastructure to measure those that, okay, this is the API, this is how success looks like, what success looks like. And then finally you get yet another AI with a fresh context to go and implement the background for all of this so it meets these success criteria. So the value of measuring success for a product, for a software, is becoming more and more important. So as software architecture and software design.
Excellent. What we'll do now is go ahead and shift this conversation to a little bit more about you on the personal side for us. And the first question I have for you is, what is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
So in the past couple of years, I've got into Buddhism a little bit. And really, I've got to this point where, like most people, I guess, in my age, we spend a lot of our life thinking. And we don't even notice that we are thinking. Like most of our awake life is thinking. And these thoughts, they interact with our feelings. Sometimes they drive our feelings. Sometimes the feelings drive, our thoughts. And certainly these thoughts, they drive our speech and actions. So where do these thoughts come from? Do we have control over these thoughts, or do they just happen to us? Is it like music or noise that you just hear when you enter the subway? All of these are super, super important in terms of like understanding actually how I'm spending my life. If all of my life I'm just thinking, and especially in the age of AI and social media, where your thought process can be easily manipulated, easily tilted one way or another way without you
Right.
knowing it. Having a handle on that becomes even more important.
Right. And I think this is actually going to become even more important because I think with algorithms of social media apps, like you said, they can implement certain things in the algorithm to have particular perspectives being pushed out to people. And if you don't understand how you're being manipulated, or you don't understand how your subconscious mind is picking up on certain things, you won't really have an independent thinking process. I think that's such a really great perspective you provided. So why has this become important to you, and when did it become important to you?
So I was straying through some stages of my life where I was dealing with some unhappiness, like general unhappiness with my life. Like I was successful at work, from financial perspective, I was successful, but I was still saying that it's like I'm chasing something. It's something that never arrives. Like what is it? And I was fortunate that one of my friends introduced the app called Waking Up from Sam Harris. That is really about meditation and Buddhism, the background about Buddhism. And I started reading it and I saw that, oh my God, this is a different perspective. It's very different compared to the Western perspective of how science works and what thoughts are. So, and immediately I got connected to it. I've been meditating pretty much on a daily basis. I just came back from a 5-day meditation retreat, and really having the agency over your daily life, it's not possible if you don't spend some time understanding what thoughts are. You're always thinking. If you don't know what thoughts are, if you don't understand where they come from, or how you can, see a bigger perspective and don't let them reactively control your life, it's going to be life is always going to be a chase of something tomorrow.
Agreed. And a concluding statement about that is the fact that thoughts are actually what dictate your actions. So if you don't think it can change your life, then I think you have to understand, why do you take action in the first place? You take action because you're convicted in the reason for taking that action, and those come from thoughts. So I think it's very important to understand those things can actually impact your life. But I appreciate that perspective. It's actually a very rare one that we don't talk about enough, and especially with AI, with specifically social media apps, developing and implementing perspectives that people don't really recognize they're adopting, essentially. So I appreciate that perspective. So I'll do a very quick concise health segment, and we're going to go ahead and conclude the podcast and your plans for this year. So as you know, Faraz, a lot of my audience are entrepreneurs, executives, and other technical leaders. So something I'd love to do is to share a perspective that's very time efficient when it comes to health and fitness from my own experience. And the main thing I would say in terms of priority is try to prioritize an approach that's location independent rather than focus on solely a gym dependent approach. Only reason I suggest this is because if you want to be able to continue an approach long term and be able to retain results, you have to have an approach you can adhere to, and something that adapts to your schedule versus you making time for it is generally going to be easier to adhere to. So I always talk about this one particular movement is leveraging step count, because that's something you can do literally while you're listening to this podcast. You can do this while you're traveling, and I can guarantee you have ground underneath you 99% of your life. So prioritizing an approach that can basically follow you wherever you go is going to be a lot more easier to adhere to on the long-term scale. And being able to adhere to something long-term is exactly how you keep the results long-term. So hopefully that's viable. And this is actually what I actually use to lose 70 pounds and keep it off. So hopefully that gives a different perspective to what's being traditionally told, and hopefully was valuable for the audience. So what we'll do now is go ahead and conclude the podcast with Faraz's plans for this year. And if you have anything in regards to professional, personally, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I love, your way of coming up with some activity that you can do everywhere. Step is great. I love it. Dancing is another way. So
yes,
please
it is.
Get into dancing, connect with other people, get off your phone. Physical world is out there. Thank you so much for doing this podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing your next episodes as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining, Faraz. It was a pleasure to have you on. This was Aryan Mohindra and Faraz Mirzaei.